massacre of Americans in Mexico at the hands of the vicious cartels. We'll talk about where that stands right now. Also, the transcript is out of at least one impeachment witness against Trump. We know the Democrats are cheating on the process. Baseball's Kurt Suzuki was at the White House, and he did something that upset some folks. Also, has Jack Ryan been ruined, and is Aunt Becky going to prison for 40 years? That and more coming up. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We have a lot to get to today, as is our custom. I did want to start off, though, with an absolutely gut-punching, heart-wrenching, really horrific story that I think, unfortunately, is a harbinger of some further violence and instability on our southern border to come. Here's where it stands right now. Cartel gunmen have killed at least 9 U.S. citizens, including 6 children who were in the Mexican border state of Sonora. This is not far from the U.S.-Mexico border with Arizona, where this attack took place. Ranita Maria LeBaron died along with her 6-month-old twins and her 2 other children, aged 10 and 12. Christina Langford Johnson, Donna Langford, and 2 of Donna's children, aged 3 and 11, were also killed. The victims here belong to the LeBaron family. They are U.S. citizens, dual citizens with Mexico, who live in a Mormon breakaway community in this part of rural northern Mexico. The stories, the details that we have so far about this coordinated ambush are horrific beyond imagining. There were children who died as these cars were on fire. They were strapped into the vehicles, unable to escape. Children were reportedly executed while trying to run away from this 3 SUV convoy after it had been attacked. There's also some early reports and indications that some of the women who were captured, they believe members of the family may have been captured and are being held, were sexually assaulted in this whole process too. As vicious and awful an ambush as you could imagine, murdering children. A lot of people are going to see this and say, wait a second, you mean that Mexico is in a really bad place? This will be something of a surprise to them. Not people who watch and listen to this show, however. You will recall that we have done in recent weeks stories on what happened in Culiacan, Mexico, where you had cartel gunmen on behalf of Chapo Guzman's son, Ovidio, shut down essentially an entire city, a major city in Mexico, and have the national government back off. You know, when the national government backs off of a gunfight with the bad guys, with the thugs, you're in a very bad place. I've also been telling you now for the last 2 years that Mexico has the highest murder rate that it has had in history right now. That Mexico is seeing more violence internally than at any time since they have been counting homicides. How much of this do you see getting attention in the news media? There are reasons for that, my friends. This is not an oversight. This is not an accident. And I will get into why this doesn't fit the narrative for the mainstream media in a second. But going back into this ambush of women and children, defenseless women and children in a convoy on a dirt road, I do not believe, and this is now assessment, this is not reporting, this is not based on anything other than me looking through the details, but I used to do this quite a bit at the CIA and then at the NYPD Intelligence Division. Look at the early signs, try to understand what the indicators are. People who are saying that this is an accident, meaning they thought that they were attacking a rival cartel, I don't believe that. I could be wrong. I don't believe it. People who are referring to this as being caught in the crossfire, well, that suggests that there were people on the other side firing and this convoy somehow got in the middle, which there's no evidence to support that either. I think there's a real effort here, and some people, from some people in our media, in the U.S. media, to find an explanation for this that's not the cartels basically run Mexico. That the cartels are now more powerful than any politician, more powerful than the central government in a day-to-day way, and that they're just covering this up, and that Lopez Obrador has been, with his hugs, not bullets policy, that's actually a thing, by the way, trying to find ways to do development and to not go to war with the cartels. The cartels have gone to war with Mexico, and what they show us right now is that they have no problem engaging in the worst atrocities, not just against cartel rivals and innocent Mexicans, to the tune of tens of thousands of people a year, about 30 to 35,000 murders in Mexico every year. That's a lot for a country that's less than half the size of the United States and has about double our murder rate, perhaps even more, like 2.5 times. So there's a big problem here. But that the cartel would do this could be something of a turning point. You would think that perhaps this would get attention. These were Americans. These were at least 9, perhaps more, killed and perhaps more captured now, and who knows what's going on. Unthinkable atrocities in captivity. But these are our people. These are Americans. Yes, they're dual citizens. They're American citizens, too. And they are down there in Mexico, and they were just slaughtered by cartels. Now, I appreciate that President Trump has taken the position he has on this. He says that a wonderful family, this was on Twitter this morning, a wonderful family and friends from Utah got caught between 2 vicious drug cartels who were shooting at each other, with the result being many great American people killed, including young children and some missing. If Mexico needs or requests help in cleaning out these monsters, the United States stands ready, willing, and able to get involved and do the job quickly and effectively. The great new president of Mexico has made this a big issue, but the cartels have become so large and powerful, you need sometimes an army to defeat an army. So the president is saying here himself that they were caught in the crossfire. I can't understand how that would work, though. And if they're caught in the crossfire, why would children running away from the convoy be specifically executed? They couldn't be concerned about these kids IDing cartel gunmen from afar. And that's already in the reporting. So I think that in the initial assessment here, there are mistakes that are being made. But I'll update this as we find out more. And that seemed to me to be a first take on the issue, unless the other eyewitness accounts that we're hearing about are incorrect. It's also noteworthy that Mexican authorities were not particularly helpful in this, and that family members of those who had been murdered had to swarm the hills around this attack site themselves looking for survivors. So the Mexican government does not have this well in hand. They will also, of course, not invite in, at least not openly, direct American kinetic assistance, shall we say, at least not something that they'll talk about publicly. We have a real problem here. Even if, let's assume for a moment that the initial reporting about this being a caught in the crossfire moment is true, well, then that would mean that the cartels are still willing to execute women and children in the midst of a gun battle with their opponents, knowing that this is going to be, even in Mexico, this incident was going to get a lot of attention. They don't care. They're not worried about the bad press particularly. There have been so many murders and so many atrocities in Mexico. They have police convoys that are ambushed with, I think it was recently, 9 officers in one instance murdered by cartel gunmen. Why does this come as a surprise to so many Americans? Why does this come as a surprise to people in this country? Well, we are led to believe by the press, by the Democratic Party, by the open borders movement here, that Mexico is not a security concern for us. When if you look at the amount of heroin that is pouring into this country, as well as opioids, the number of people that are dying from those heroin and opioid overdoses, and who controls that trade, it is almost entirely the Mexican drug cartels. Mexican drug cartels are poisoning American cities. Thousands and thousands of people now are dying every year, over 70,000 in one of our particularly bad recent years. And I know that the press likes to beat up on pharmaceutical companies, and there were some pharma companies that engaged in unethical practices for which they have now been financially annihilated, and perhaps there will also be further criminal sanction against individuals involved, including doctors prescribing drugs. But keep in mind that the way our laws work in this country right now, if someone sells opioids to a person who overdoses, they don't get charged with just selling a controlled substance. They are charged with manslaughter or murder. They are held responsible for that homicide. So based on that very same legal approach, which is a day-to-day reality here in America, the drug cartels are responsible for killing thousands and thousands of Americans every year. Who knows how many? It's very tough to actually get this data. I've asked around for it. I even asked somebody that contacted the DEA. Say, well, it's hard to know where the drugs come from. So we know most of the drugs come from Mexico. We know about 60 to 70,000 people are dying from these drug overdoses every year. We know Big Pharma has been put on notice, and doctors know they risk not just their license, but their freedom for decades if they overprescribe on purpose or illicitly prescribe these drugs. So what is the most likely scenario here? Let's put all of this together. That the drug cartels that are now multi-billion-dollar international criminal syndicates are responsible for poisoning our cities and causing just unimaginable social destruction. And yet we are told that Mexico is not a national security concern for us. We're told that the fact that there's a country right next door that has organized crime more powerful than the central government and can even outgun them in a major city is not something that we need to be worried about. Those syndicates, by the way, those cartels, they have connections, they have tentacles that stretch into every major U.S. city and, in fact, a lot of mid-sized and small U.S. cities, too. Sometimes they try to keep a low profile here because, thank God, our law enforcement has not yet been outgunned by cartels, and they still have to operate with some degree of discretion and fear of law enforcement in America. Not so in Mexico. And trust me, the history of that country, its corruption, its inability to have durable institutions that will root out corruption, that all indicates to me that what's going on there right now, there are people going all the way up the chain of the Mexican government who are either not willing to fight against the cartels or are on the cartels' payroll. The cartels have something on them. The cartels have threatened their family. The cartels are in some way exerting leverage on them. How is this not one of the biggest stories in the country? I ask you that question. How is it possible that we have 70,000 or so Americans dying every year, overwhelmingly from poison being poured into our cities by our neighbor to the south, by the organized crime groups there that are killing Americans on our side and killing tens of thousands of Mexicans, people who are just caught in the crossfire, day in and day out? Why can't they get control of this? Why aren't there law enforcement and judicial systems strong enough to finally root this out? These are questions that we should ask much more than we do, and it's also something that I think should get a whole lot more attention at not just in our media, but also from our own government. We've heard a lot about how we need to treat the opioid epidemic by putting more facilities in place, and that's all well and good. But how about stopping the poison from entering our cities? You know, people are not growing heroin in their backyard in Vermont or in Utah. It's coming in from south of our border, and it's being grown in Mexico. There's been an enormous shift. Heroin used to be overwhelmingly from Afghanistan. It was a big cash crop for the Taliban. UN estimates back even a decade ago were that over 90% of the world's heroin market was grown in essentially southern and eastern Afghanistan. Now, about 90% of the heroin and opioids coming into this country that are on the street illegally are coming from Mexico, and they are made in or grown in Mexico. Oh, but the fact that we have a porous border, the fact that we have millions and millions of illegal aliens in the country who, yes, a very small percentage of whom are involved directly in the cartel trade, but there's still a percentage of them who are, and that percentage, by the way, is responsible for thousands and thousands of U.S. deaths. You can read Sam Quinonez's book, Dreamland. He goes into this in detail. He's an LA Times reporter. He's not a conservative. He's a liberal. The cartels made inroads into U.S. cities at just the same time that there was this surge in prescription painkillers, and they capitalized on it and murdered countless Americans in the process, addicted people and put them in a position where the likelihood of an overdose was overwhelming. Mexico is a big problem. How much time, I ask you this, have you heard the media wailing about the Kurds in the last few weeks versus how much time have you heard them talking about the gunfight in Culiacan? How much do you think they'll spend on this mass assassination of this ambush and slaughter of 9 Americans? The number's probably going to grow in Mexico. What's a bigger threat? Who has killed more Americans in the last 30 days? Cartels in Mexico, which are right on our border and can come and go as they please largely across our border? Or ISIS in Syria? Who should we be more concerned about? A lot of people giving weighty speeches about the threat of Erdogan. What about the threat of the Sinaloa cartel? Which one's more likely to be a problem for you in your community, wherever you are in the country, by the way? From coastal California to Appalachia, north and south, everything in between, the cartels have tentacles all over the place. People in your town, your city are dying because of what they do. Where's the media focus on this? Where's the CNN, the MSNBC town hall on cartels and the opioid epidemic? Oh, you mean that it's almost like it doesn't fit the narrative. None of us are surprised here in the Freedom Hut, are we? Just an update on this ambush as I was taking a moment here to look at the numbers. 9 killed, 7 injured children are now in the United States, and they were part of this Mormon sect that had left the United States decades ago and settled in Mexico because of a schism over the practice of polygamy. This group also, just as a side note of the history of it, involved at one point George Romney, Mitt Romney's father, lived in this part of Mexico as a member of this sect. I believe he was born there. So there also there's some additional numbers here. Last year I said 30 to 35,000. It was 33,000 murders in Mexico last year. 2019 so far is going to break that. There'll be at about 35,000 murders in this country of Mexico, and the authorities are just hoping that they don't have to. I think they just don't want to lift the lid off and see what's underneath here in terms of the cartels. They don't want to deal with it. They're just hoping it goes away, but it's not going to go away. This is a powder keg. This could go at any point.
We also now know the name of the whistleblower. The whistleblower needs to come before Congress as a material witness because he worked for Joe Biden at the same time Hunter Biden was getting money from corrupt oligarchs. I say tonight to the media, do your job and print his name.
Why is the whistleblower's name sacrosanct? Who said that that's the case? Who and where? Show me the statute or show me the regulation that claims that a internal federal government, federal agency whistleblower who decides to blow the whistle on something that's not even within the purview of his or her agency has a guarantee of anonymity for as long as that person wants it. Huh. Does anybody want to explain that one to me? But the problem here, and we're going to keep running in circles around this, is that the process is largely whatever the Democrats decide, because they're in the majority in the House, whatever they decide the process is, that's what it will be. So they'll make it as unfair as they want and claim that they have the power for this process to be what it is. And Republicans are right to point out some of the glaring imbalances in all this, but it's not going to change anything ultimately. It's going to continue to be more or less what it is, which is a get Trump, destroy Trump, do what you can. See, they're really just in a lot of ways shaking the tree to see what falls out. I mean, they don't even know what the end result of this whole impeachment process will be. They just know that it's bad for the president. And as we know from dealing with the left, anything that is bad for the president must be good. That's their approach. That's how they see all of this. Rand Paul also went a little further here, and this is something, and I'm just noting that a lot of what you're hearing now from the administration, from officials defending it, is where the buckster was in the beginning, which is we already know Hunter Biden is what he did is unethical and gross. We already know that this was pay to play. It might not have been illegal, but the appearance of corruption is clearly there. That's in the facts, which also means that the basis for an investigation is there, which means that the president of the United States asking a foreign counterpart to look into something is completely within his purview. Is it bare-knuckle politics? Yeah. Is Trump allowed to do that in response to what they're doing to him? Yes. In my opinion, sure. People disagree with me. You know what they can do? Vote against him. That's what this is all a political question. Democrats are trying to morph it into some legalistic process. But it's not a legal process. It's not a legal it's not a criminal justice proceeding. But people got all into this quid pro quo and all this stuff. I'm like, look, I don't even see what's wrong with it. You can go back, go to the tape, listen to early. We got the episodes on iTunes, on the iHeart app, which you can subscribe to. But on iTunes, go back, listen to what I was saying when this broke. You'll see. I said, look, I don't understand what the big problem is here. And some conservatives that I really like were very worried about it at first. But I know this game before. I know how the Russia collusion hoax was run. They get all frenzied. They get all fired up about how this is the worst thing that anyone's ever done. It's worse than Nixon. And then when you look at it and you deal with the facts, you say, hold on a second. Why exactly is this worse than Nixon? Why is this worse than Watergate? It's always important to take a breath. When liberals tell you that the republic is about to sink and we're all doomed, that's when it's worthwhile to step outside, get some fresh air, and think, do I trust these people? The answer is no. So since I don't trust them, should I listen to them about this? The answer is also no. But Rand Paul understands that the Hunter Biden thing, Democrats are sensitive about it because it looks gross. There's no question about it. Play clip 5 if you would.
Hunter Biden made $50,000 a month. That's the definition of corruption. We know he got it only because of his family connections. And I say to my colleagues, if Shifty Schiff will not let Hunter Biden come, and if he will not bring the whistleblower forward, every Republican in Congress should take a walk and say, this is a farce.
I think that at some point, Republican nullification of the process, or at least refusal to behave, or to behave, maybe, to be a part of the process, that's what this is heading to. I do think at some point Republicans should probably just say we're not gonna do this. We're not gonna show up. What are they gonna do? They're gonna send the sergeant at arms to arrest all the Republicans for not wanting to sit through Adam Schiff's bizarre inquisition. Hunter Biden, which all you have to go is back to the Democrat debate where Anderson Cooper's like, whatever his question was, it's basically, hey, I'm going to ask you about Ukraine, Joe Biden, but I'm also going to make sure that there's no evidence against you and there's no evidence you did anything wrong, and now I'm going to ask my question. Well, I mean, that all depends on what the meaning of wrong is. Because to me, it is quite clearly wrong for someone to get $50,000 a month when their father is on the board. Because remember, even if you really think this through, you understand why the Democrats are so sensitive about this. Let's say for a second that what Hunter and Joe Biden have told us all along is true, which is a leap I will have you know that I'm not willing to make. But let's just say that they made this, or they did not discuss anything Ukraine related, and that Hunter never even promised the Ukrainians who were sending him these big checks every month that he was going to be their guy with the administration, with the Obama administration. And let's assume that Joe Biden's telling the truth. And remember, I don't believe that this is true, but even if we go to that level where we say everything they've told us so far is true, the Ukrainian company Burisma was paying Hunter Biden to be on the board as an insurance policy. Right? Something that we know the Democrats know about. Remember the discussion about the insurance policy in Andy McCabe's office of what if Trump gets elected? Yeah, they try to pretend that we're not going to remember that, but we do remember. So the insurance policy is an issue here. The way that you can see this is that if Hunter Biden's on the board of Burisma, wouldn't that, even without anyone being told anything, in Ukraine, which is very dependent on U.S. aid at this point in time, the Obama administration is heavily engaged in Ukraine as a foreign policy issue. Wouldn't you know, just without being told, let's not get too crazy with this Burisma investigation. And if you were the person making the decisions or the group making the decisions about who's on the Burisma board, you would know that too. That it doesn't matter, right? Why is it a problem for somebody why is nepotism an issue in general? Why is it a problem in government for a father? If Trump were to, and you guys know that I disagree with the nepotism that this administration engages in. I do. I think it's wrong, and people can tell me all day that the best people are the people he trusts and they're around him, but let's be honest about this for a second, folks. Look at a lot of the decisions Trump has made about who to put around him. Like the mooch. This is an area where, if you're not willing to criticize the president, I got to say, I think it's starting to come pretty close to where are you willing to criticize this president? And I'm a big supporter, as you know. That's a different thing. Supporting somebody and saying everything they do is brilliant is not this. Those are not equivalent. But why is nepotism an issue in the first place? Well, because if I'm the president of the United States, let's make it President Buck, which would be amazing, by the way, but it's not going to happen. I like getting sleep and relaxing and going for walks anonymously in New York. Let's say that there was President Buck, and I had a son who was great, and I wanted to make my son Secretary of State. How could anybody have confidence that I wasn't picking my son? Because whether I ever tell anybody or not, whether I ever write it down or make it a quid pro quo or make it official or not, the fact of the matter is that I have a personal relationship to that person, and that will affect my decision-making. The same is true about Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma. When his dad is running policy in that country, there doesn't have to be a discussion about it. The point is that it makes it look like nobody could touch Burisma because Hunter Biden's there. So people are saying, oh, but there's no smoking gun. It doesn't matter. We've already established that this was gross. We've already established that this is wrong. He never should have done it, of course. Why did Joe Biden say to him, I hope you know what you're doing? I mean, Joe Biden's kind of a moron, but he's smart enough to figure out that having his son on the board of a company when he's running Obama administration policy in that country is a problem. Doesn't look good. Media has no interest in this whatsoever, and they're certain, by the way, that there's no further investigation needed. I mean, we've had the Mueller probe. We've had every media organization in the country that's anti-Trump, which is 90% of them, digging into Russia collusion as though their lives depended on it. Same thing, over and over, same witnesses, same storyline, everything. But in the case of Burisma with Hunter Biden, we know everything we need to know, nothing to see here, move on or else you're a conspiracy theorist. Sorry. Not going to play the game the way they want me to, because I know what the other side's really all about. I know what matters to them. Let's also, though, talk about this Jovanovic testimony. The good news here, folks, is I read the Jovanovic testimony. It's already been, I don't know if I think they leaked it or maybe it's out officially. I can't keep up with all the shenanigans going on with this committee. But I read the Jovanovic testimony, and let me tell you, it is not exactly riveting stuff. All these State Department people have the same, I've just been doing all the best I can for U.S. foreign policy, and I'm a selfless public servant, and I have no politics. And right, we get it. Okay, fine. Some of them are, some of them aren't. It's like any large organization. Go to the university of some big school, and there'll be brilliant people there, there'll be idiots there. That's like the State Department, that's like the CIA, that's like the FBI. You get a mix. But Jovanovic's testimony, there are a few things that are worth noting from this, which I'll tell you. But just in case you happen to flip on the TV and you see Shifty Schiff trying to lie to you about it, I want to give you some of what really happens or what really is clear from the testimony, and more importantly, on the process. And we have a problem here, though, because the Democrats can set and are setting the process. It's deeply unfair, but they're allowed to make it deeply unfair. You know what the check is on the unfair process the Democrats in this House impeachment inquiry are doing? You, the voter. That's why this is political.
Ambassador Jovanovic had a well-earned reputation as a fighter of corruption. And she was working with Ukraine to get Ukraine to fight corruption. And so what does this irregular back channel sanctioned by the president do? It seeks to remove someone fighting corruption in Ukraine. by employing a vicious smear campaign in which the State Department at the highest levels acknowledged had no merit whatsoever. That smear campaign, orchestrated by this irregular channel, was successful in removing a U.S. ambassador and tarring her reputation. Of course, you see the president's comments about the ambassador in the call record.
All right, some notes of caution here. What does he see? Jovanovic, I think he's calling it. I can never get these names right. I was saying Jovanovic, tomato, you know, I'm trying to get it right. So, of course, it's tomato, by the way, not tomato. What are we on, like Faulty Towers? It's ridiculous. Do you even know? You don't even know what Faulty Towers is, do you, producer? This is just like, nah, I just old manned myself here, didn't I? You have no idea. Next thing I'll be talking to you about MASH.
I at least know what MASH was.
Well, that's good.
I have a clue, but the other thing, no clue.
No clue, yeah. So, a few things about this. One, my notes of caution here. Do I think that it's possible that perhaps the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, might have been a bit overzealous? And, you know, I know the mayor. I like the mayor, so I would have a very hard time without hard evidence ever speaking ill of him. But is it possible, theoretically, that maybe he had some bad information on this ambassador and there was a smear campaign against her that was not meant to be a smear campaign, but they really thought she was working against Trump administration wishes in some way? I could say, I don't know, right? We're working with very imperfect information here, but a few things that I would note. The State Department, careerists of the State Department are politically in line with the Oberlin Women's and Gender Studies Faculty Lounge, okay? They are politically in line with the far left of America. I'd say two out of three or 3 out of 4, right? So you're looking at a healthy majority, aren't even just Democrats, they're leftists. They're internationalists. I've spent a lot of time, I know a lot of people, dated somebody a long time ago from the State Department. I know the State Department, okay? Not super well, I didn't work there, but I know enough about it, having interacted with it and being around it enough to know that and there were back in the day a lot of actual, when I say commies, I mean communists. There were communist penetrations of the State Department at a very high level, and to this day, people pretend that did not happen. Don't even get me started on Alger Hiss and the Pumpkin Papers and everything else. That's real, though. Read Witness, Whitaker Chambers. Fantastic, fantastic book. Really one of the people that got National Review up and running, along with William F. Buckley. You should read Whitaker Chambers' Witness. The left still pretends that there weren't commie infiltrations of this country, and specifically of the highest levels of the United States government, because the left always has a little bit of a soft spot for commies. Now but I'm just giving you the numbers. I don't know if she is an anti-Trumper or not. I would just note that it's very possible that she was. So, based on what you usually see for people that work for the State Department. That's one aspect of this. Also, that Adam Schiff is telling you nothing but the most praising or praiseworthy, sweeping statements of how wonderful she is. That just puts me a little bit on edge. And the Obama administration as great fighters of corruption in Ukraine. Play clip 9, if you would, please.
Ambassador Jovanovic had a well-earned reputation as a fighter of corruption. And she was working with Ukraine to get Ukraine to fight corruption. And so what does this irregular back channel sanctioned by the president do? It seeks to remove someone fighting corruption in Ukraine.
Right, but is he saying that she was being removed because she was fighting corruption in Ukraine, or is she being removed because it was believed that she was opposed to President Trump or did not like President Trump at some level? I mean, is now the storyline that President Trump wants Ukraine corruption? That's new. That would be a new addition into this whole thing. Keep in mind that the Democrats do not allow House minority Republicans or the House Republicans who are in the minority to pull their own witnesses. They're not allowed to ask questions. So they're just there to watch the show, so to speak, so that then the Democrats can do whatever they want in the show and pretend that this is bipartisan. But it is clearly not bipartisan. Democrats also have threatened, I believe, to withhold pay of State Department officials who show up and want there to be a State Department lawyer present with them during this testimony. Why would the State Department have a lawyer present with them? Well, to protect executive branch equities in all of this to make sure that the executive branch, which is a co-equal branch with the Congress, is not having its prerogatives run roughshod over. I don't know if that's really the way you'd say that, but you know what I mean. But no, you're not allowed to, or else they'll hold your pay. I think I read that today, which seemed just absolutely outrageous.